have with us a distinguished guest, Dr. Aasim Padela, who will be speaking on constructing the field of Islamic bioethics. Dr. Padela is the director of the Initiative on Islam and Medicine and faculty member at McLean Center for Clinical Medical Ethics at the University of Chicago. Dr. Padela is an emergency medicine physician, health services researcher, and bioethicist whose scholarship focuses on the intersection of community health, religious tradition, and bioethics. His research explores the ways in which the Islamic tradition and its authorities assess modern biomedicine and biotechnology. In 2010, he was a visiting fellow at the Center of Islamic Studies at Oxford University, working on projects related to Islamic moral and theological ethical frameworks. And from 2013 to 2014, he was a Templeton Foundation faculty scholar, conducting a national survey of Muslim physicians' bioethical attitudes and experiences with religious discrimination. Dr. Padela's scholarship has been featured in multiple media outlets, including CNN, the New York Times, USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, the National, and others. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Aasim Padela.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khairan for that introduction. A little bit undeserved, but alhamdulillah, I'm glad to be here with you today. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen wal aqibatu lil muttaqeen wa salatu wassalamu ala khair khalqihi Muhammadin wa ala alihi sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma allimna bima yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bi fadlika ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. So we start with the traditional greetings of salam and a praise to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and thankfulness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Today I'm going to speak to you about this topic of constructing the field of Islamic bioethics. And I struggled when I was putting this talk together because I knew that there would be various different people and different relationships to Islam, to bioethics, to medicine. And so what I'm going to have here is sort of an experiment with you all. I'm going to talk about a few things, but really my interest is in the concepts that we leave with today. So the talk is really this, why should Islamic bioethics, or why Islamic bioethics should matter to Islamic studies. We are here at the American Islamic College, which is trying to create leaders and educate individuals about Islam. And they want to have that, not just Islam that's intellectual exercise, but one that's practiced in the lives of its graduates and the leaders that they produce. They want to then go out and promote that in the larger context of the American context. Hence, I think for us, it's important to think about why this field in particular, one that I am deeply rooted in, or I'm trying to create with others, is important for the general study of Islam in America. So with that said, a brief introduction of work the program that I lead at the University of Chicago does. We reside at this intersection between the seminary and the academy along the axis of Islam. The idea being here that Islam, right, is understood in the academy as a subject of study, as an object of study, but in the seminary it's a lived tradition that is embodied by individuals. And there's a divide here, an intellectual divide as well as a discursive divide, and we want to reside in that circle, trying to help those who are seminaries understand how Islam is understood in the academy and how it's studied in the academy. Similarly, the people in the academy to understand how the seminarians view Islam as a normative tradition. On the other spectrum here, you have the Muslim community and the healthcare system, and we are at the intersection on American Muslim health. So we want the Muslim community's voices to inform the way that the healthcare system delivers care for American Muslims. Right? So that's where we reside, and that's why we call ourselves the Initiative on Islam and Medicine. Our project is one of translation, largely in conceptual terms. So we would like to have, and in all our programs, some of which have been co-sponsored by the American Islamic College, we'd like to have people get together, different stakeholder groups, and to create a shared lexicon of how they think about things. Right? So here you see, well, aside from myself, you see a biologist and a PhD Islamic Studies individual scholar talking together. We want to foster those conversations because the way he thinks about how Islam is relevant to his work as a microbiologist might be very different than this individual who reads books about Islam and how that has to do with the science. Right? But fostering a conversation leads to new knowledge, and that's what we need to do. So today, as a way of background, Islamic bioethics is a newly birthed field of academic inquiry from many different corners. I'm going to go through those different corners for a second, but there is a lot of interest in this field of Islamic bioethics. However, both of these terms are problematic in certain ways, and we're going to spend some of our time trying to dissect that. Right? So what does Islamic mean in Islamic bioethics? More specifically, what content qualifies as Islamic? If you address that question, then you will have some idea about what you would construct as the disciplinary parameters for the field of Islamic bioethics and its research methods. But it must start with trying to define what qualifies as Islamic. What is that component? Similarly, the bioethics component of Islamic bioethics is also problematic. For one, what is the scope and nature of bioethics? Who is or who are the audiences? Some would argue that bioethics resides primarily between the patient and the doctor. That's the primary audience. That interaction is one that you want to have be carried out in an ethical manner. Hence, bioethics should be focusing on that. Others might say that it actually has to do with state policy. For example, we know that the way to eliminate most health disparities in the United States, or actually in many countries, would be to give people more money, to elevate their socioeconomic status. That would reduce a lot of disparities in health. That's a state policy issue. And so some would say that bioethics must reside at the state level because you then lift up all boats, not just one boat. Similarly, there's a question about what is bioethics in terms of a field itself. Right? Is it a multidisciplinary or an interdisciplinary field? And the way that I use these terms, multidisciplinary would mean that there are many different stakeholders, many different disciplines that come together, and it's a shared produced field. Or actually, is it an interdisciplinary field that requires, and what we used to think about classically, you have to be, in this space, when you talk about it, people say you must know Islam, you must know medicine. So the one who's an Islamic bioethics expert will be one who's versed in medicine and Islam, meaning that it resides at the interspace of these two different fields. Right? So you must have knowledge of both, not it's the production activity of many different disciplines coming together. So hence, that both terms are in some ways problematic for a field in development. So by means of a little bit more further background, let's talk about who needs or particularly who searches for Islamic bioethic guidance. And I told you that there are a lot of consumers, there's a lot of people interested in this field. Here are some of them. So for example, Muslim patients, right? And all these individuals or these representative individuals or classes of individuals, I can prove to you from data. And some of this work we've done ourselves at the Institute of Islamic Medicine. But Muslim patients do look for Islamic bioethic guidance, right? For example, they want to have concordance between the medical care they receive and what they think of Islamic regulations about that, right? So they're a consumer of Islamic bioethics material. You have Muslim healthcare providers. Right? In the introduction, it was mentioned that I just did a survey of American Muslim physicians, a national survey. We found that I think nearly 85% of them have said that Islamic bioethics informs their practice in some sort of way. We can deconstruct what that meant to them, but here it influences their practice. There is a quote-unquote, in their mind at least, an Islamic ethos to their practice in medicine. Religious leaders in the community, some of the work that we do is with communities, with imams and local masajid. They also need to advise, they're called on to advise clinicians and patients about biomedicine. They get these calls about people in the ICU or people who might have some sort of procedure or counseling people who have gone or undergone some sort of crisis in their lives. So they also search for Islamic bioethic guidance. Healthcare institutions like the one that I come from also want to inform, want to have higher quality care delivered to various constituencies. One of them are American Muslims. Hence they are interested in what Islam has to say or what Islamic bioethics has to say about delivering better healthcare to those populations. And then this is sort of a very group of policy and community stakeholders, right? There are a lot of people, and this is what you get at the ISNA crowd, a lot of people who have a lot of Muslim advocacy work they want to do, right? They want to have this and that and the other thing. So hence you have a lot of advocates for a more culturally accommodating healthcare system, but also those who want to have an intellectual field of Islamic bioethics produced for various reasons. Just like chaplaincy, I would say, being at this institution. So with that sort of said, who are the individuals that are producing material of this field? Right, so you have a lot of consumers I've outlined. Who are the producers? Similarly here, what we often think about is this is where Islamic bioethics resides. We have a physician who is worried about something. So he says, what are the Islamic ethical legal perspectives on stem cell research, for example, or organ donation, or something or other? They go seek out an imam or a clerical authority. That clerical authority looks to the sources of Islamic law, right? Know all these, the objectives of Islamic law, and looks at the qawa'id, the genre of ethical legal maxims, and he comes up with some sort of ruling of whether this sort of question, whatever this technology they're talking about or this practice, whether it is on the spectrum from obligatory to forbidden according to Islamic law. He issues this fatwa and gives thumbs up to what the physician wants to do or thumbs down. And when the public community thinks about Islamic bioethics, they often focus and think this is what Islamic bioethics is. A jurist, political authority, talking to a physician. You can replace the physician with a patient. So that's how they think about it. And we know that there's also not just one scholar. There might be groups of scholars coming together, issuing juridical rulings, and there might be groups of physicians coming together, debating around that. But that's where many people think that is what the primary material, source material of Islamic bioethics is. It's this, fatwa. I'm going to tell you that's not true, and that's very problematic. And we'll talk about that maybe more in the Q&A. I'm going to show you why through this presentation. So that's for example, that's Islam QA, a fatwa about donating blood. You have individuals writing about this. Okay, but let's talk about the other producer of Islamic bioethics. So this is a search engine we use, a bibliography, a database that we use in medicine often, PubMed, Medline. And you see here, I just did Islamic bioethics and organization. You get several articles, right? What you'll notice is, and I want to point out, since I know most of these individuals, I want to point out who's writing to whom. So this is a database where physicians go to seek medical guidance about something. So medical research or ethical research, they go to this database. Many of you are familiar with this. So you have the first, this is Fathat Muazzam Amir Jafri. Fathat Muazzam is an MD, PhD. She's an MD, she's a physician, she's a surgeon, she's in Pakistan. She leads the Center for Bioethics and Culture there. And she has a PhD from Georgetown in religious ethics. Right? Forget about me. You have Muhammad Ghali. He's writing as a PhD in Islamic studies from Azhar. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but is there a way to enlarge this particular screen?
I don't believe so. I'm not familiar with Mac.
We'll just take your word for it.
Yeah, take my word for it. This is Muhammad Ghali. He's a good friend of mine. So he's a PhD. Islamic studies from Leiden, State of Azhar, but he's writing to a physician or medical audience. You have Stefan van den Branden, who is a PhD from the Netherlands. Again, his, I think it's in philosophy, his doctoral degree. We can forget about the physicians. So you see here, even in the search engine, which is primarily for clinicians and patients, right? You see that there are PhD interlopers writing in here. When you go to the library catalog at the University of Chicago, this is books, those are papers, so let's look at books. So you find you have the first thing that you get in Islamic bioethics, you get Abdulaziz Sachedina's book, Islamic Bioethics, Principles Application. So we know him, right? He's a prominent scholar in the American context at George Mason currently, a PhD in Islamic Studies. Then you have Farhat Muslim again, we mentioned her. You have this is an edited volume if you have about that. And then down here you have Muslim Medical Ethics by John Brockup, John Brockup's also a PhD at University, he was at Penn State. So what you see here, my point only here is that if we thought that bioethics resided, right, between a patient and physician, that's not necessarily true in terms of discourse. And if we thought it was these jurists, I did not mention a single jurist in this yet. A single jurist. So you have physicians and others producing material. You also have Muslim physician groups, right? So Imana, the Islamic Medical Association of North America, they put on their own sort of perspective. And you have the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences, right, which brings together jurists and physicians, and they deliberate over ethical issues and they issue their own sort of perspectives. So you have not only individuals now, you have institutions that are attendant to this field. So what ends up happening is when you have these sorts of, or in any space, when you have so many different types of individuals writing, it leads to confusion, right? Oftentimes they don't have the same methodologies, the same writing style, the same sources, the same Islam they call to might be different. And so this is what I want to sort of characterize, that we have a lot of people interested, a lot of consumers, but what we lack is clarity, right, around the Islamic content, and then what is the scope of bioethics. So that was the background. And what I thought would be interesting for this audience, and we can talk more about that in the Q&A, and if you want me to continue on that, we can. But what I want to point out here is why I think this field is particularly important for Islamic studies and what the opportunities are for us. And I think everyone else around the table can engage with this. So one reason I think this field is particularly important for Islamic studies is that in Islamic bioethics, however you think about Islamic, right, and Islamic bioethics must be concerned with the normative. We have debates around what is normative Islam. What does Islam mean? What is Islam? That's the question. What is Islam? Right? And what signifies something as Islamic? Right? An institution such as this one, the American Islamic College, it has in the middle of its, right, there's American, there's Islamic, and there's college. Each one of these signifies something. So for us, this field must deal with that head on. Right? What is Islam? And what signifies something as Islamic? Do you follow? Does that make sense? So for example, and there are many divides and many debates about this, right? So some might apply a sociological lens to what Islam is. So they would say that Islam is a tradition of practices, with meaning imbued by a community. That's what Islam is. It's a communal tradition, a set of practices that are passed on from generation to generation that signify what Islam is. What do you all feel about that? Someone's shaking their head. Okay. Well, you don't have to have engagement, it's fine. I will go for this one.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's too broad of a definition. I still don't really know what that means.
Go ahead.
it's too large a population. Which sect, which country,
Right.
which people.
Right. So quickly you get into this sort of, well, it doesn't answer the question, right? So if you look at what people, and is that Islam or is it someone else normative? This is deviant, and this is orthodox and heterodox. But it's a sociological lens. The point is that you're looking at a group of people, and today we all say this in the press, right? Don't look at Islamic State. That's not Islam, right? Yeah, it has Islamic as the first, right, state. I mean, we have this issue with this term, but we don't know how to define it. We don't give it an alternate definition. Similarly, and this, you can take it right to community. You can say maybe it's a meaning-making system for an individual. I'm not going to think about all, a group of individuals. I'm just one person. So my interest as a physician for a patient is whatever that patient thinks Islam is to them. That's what I'm worried about. However that patient interprets, understands Islam, that's where you are. You don't ask any further. I have nothing to do with that. Do you find that problematic? I find that problematic, right? Because in the sense that if a value system, and we'll discuss this in a certain way, so if a value system is purely subjective by individual to individual, then what is reside? Where is it, right? Then I am a community of one, and I have no way of generalizing anything to anybody else, right? It's purely subjective. Another way to approach this question would be an ethical lens. Okay, so what is Islam? Islam. Okay, well, the most, as historians write, the most or the most highly developed science of the Islamic intellectual tradition is the science of law. That is what is the most most volumes are written about that. The most interesting debates around Islam are all in that area. So we might say, okay, let's take an ethical lens or a legal lens. It's fiqh. So the ruling of the jurist is what defines what Islam is. And there might be many different rulings, but that's the normative. That's where normativity resides. In the ink, or in the words that all right, the ink describes of the jurist. Others might, and this is important for Islamic bioethics, and I'm going to demonstrate an example in a second. Others might say, well, we have to deal with the idea of theology or kalam and Sunni kalam, and there's a debate whether the kalam resides in the tradition anymore or doesn't. But in any case, that it's not just a legal lens, it's not what the jurist writes, but rather there's a theological rubric under which that jurist is thinking. Therefore, we must go back to that theological rubric. So let me give you an example, okay? So you might say, let's concretely for our audience, chemotherapy. Right? Chemotherapy is medical treatment, right? I don't know if there's any writing on whether chemotherapy is permissible or not permissible. Many would say it's permissible, right? I would assume scholars it's permissible. It's a medical treatment. It'll cure cancer potentially. It'll help an individual, okay? Now you might say, well, that's fine. The scholars written this, and you might say that's where the normativity resides. But if you take a theological lens, taking back to, well, what is the point of medicine? Where does medicine come from in the Islamic tradition? One might say that medicine is, right, is supposed to deliver healing. Healing is a characteristic, right? Is an embodiment of the characteristic of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Shafi. So when healing occurs, it must occur in an idea, theologically, from how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cures and heals individuals. Now, shifa, or Shafi, that term itself, right, many people talk about the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Jawad and others can kind of fill you in, but there are many ways of classification schemas of the different characteristics or attributes, and we can get into debates of what that is or not. One of them is Jamali Jalali, right? Does it portray Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's Jamal or Jalal, right? And, or in this case of Shifa, one might say this is Jamali, that it has to do with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What would you translate that as?
Jamal?
Yeah.
Beauty?
Majesty, yeah. Okay.
Jamal's beauty, Jalal's majesty.
Right? That inherently, that so the moment that comes from there, that sort of spectrum. So the embodiment of healing should come from a theological understanding of that term, that attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is one which has majesty present in it. Would a treatment that hurts one's body be permissible as a means of healing that? Right? Or one that we condone and think of normative? It's not a legal question. So, is it? Yeah, I'm going on time. Good. So, in my view, when we talk about constructing this field of Islamic bioethics, I think of this, and this is, this is today, this is a little old slide, but 2015, maybe in 2017 it'll change. I don't know. But here's how I think about Islam and Islamic bioethics, not the Islamic and Islamic bioethics. The way I think about it is that there are inputs from our tradition, the Islamic intellectual tradition. Law is one of them, right? Usul is one of them, and we have this. I just use this genre as the adab genre, but there are many other genres that talk about ethics and virtue, and embodiment, and character development. That this is the moral machinery of Islam, the intellectual tradition, that must come into dialogue with all these and other sciences, right? So these are the inputs from our tradition. These are discursive partners: clinical practice, social science, medical sciences, right? Philosophy and bioethics, health policy. And when you're engaged in that dialogue, then you can come up with an Islamic bioethical perspective. But if you're not either A, using these inputs and not being involved in conversation with these other sorts of sciences, then you are not producing work that's of relevance to the field of Islamic bioethics. So I think that's 6:50. Is that correct? So I will stop there. Jazakallah khair for your attention. Hopefully we'll have a good discussion after. So I think the floor is open for questions. I'm at your leave. Once you let me leave, I will leave. So I'm here for your questions. Bismillah.
Anybody have any questions?
Or thoughts?
Comments?
I've made them all very hungry and tired.
Thank you for the presentation. One of the questions that I have is that I guess gets at the idea of how deliberation works. You talk about in that final model that you put up on the screen, the discursive partners, and this. I understand the sense of bringing the variety of disciplines to the table or the variety of perspectives, but throughout the entire presentation, the issue of deliberative decision-making, either about Islamic identity or about the sources or about sociological issues or about textual issues, becomes, it seems to me, the central issue. It's not only that Islamic bioethics needs to consider all of these issues. The question, at least for me, would be also inside of bioethics, what's the decision-making mechanisms?
Very good, very good, very perceptive. So I'm going to address that maybe obliquely in two different ways. I'll take the last first. So I do think that, and the modus operandi so where I am, for example, at the McLean Center for Clinical Medical Ethics and the Ethics Academy, Clinical Ethics Academy, is that we our ambit is to look at challenges that emerge in the practice of medicine, right, that are brought to us in terms of consultation. So a patient, family, or physician might have a particularly challenging case, ethically, and then we on this committee will get together, we'll be consulted, we'll go talk to the stakeholders, we'll try to come up with some solution, and we as a community, we get together and have a discussion about what are these sort of ethical parameters for the physician and the patient, bearing in mind the legal as well. We have lawyers on the committee, and we'll think about, okay, well, whatever we think is the balance of medicine. Meaning that because medicine is one of those special vocations, right, the idea is that your peer group adjudicates and assesses. So the public, in that case it's not public, but that deliberative exercise is what would set up the parameters of the ethical in the Bioethics Academy. I actually have real concerns about whether that would be an Islamic modality or not, and how far it would go. Right? So, is it that that in matters of Islam, and when you put Islam after Islamic law, you're talking about matters of sin and faith, that this deliberative exercise would be one that would be of similar value or not? Right? So, in areas where there is lesser consequence about what's the most appropriate way to do things, maybe that's fine. But in matters of sin or assessing whether there's an element of sin within such and such act, I'm not quite sure that we can have a similar, even if it's located in the Iran, sit together with doctors and lawyers and say, okay, these are the parameters for the practice of medicine. So I think your question about how of deliberation, whether that's an acceptable modality, whether public reason exists and involves in ideas, that's an open question for the tradition. And I think that there would be different streams of tradition would say there are limited scope for public reason in certain ways. Shias might think differently than Sunnis. So I think that it's not a clear answer or a clean supposition. Yet, just to give you a sense, yet there's a wide spectrum of reasons. For example, the entire field of siyasa sharia, of governmental law in Islam, right, came up with that there's wide discretion for the ruler to do a lot of things in the domain of the permissible. We don't have to, even if we must follow what that ruler says, even if we think it's not the most appropriate action, because he has this discretion. So there's a wide scope. So it's not as small, but needs to be discussion and evolution of thought. As far as deliberation about these stakeholders, I don't know what's happening with this. It's jumping around to slides. But in any case, what we try to do is here at least get around terms, right? So let me give you an example. Central in Islamic, if you were to read today juridical rulings on medicine, you would see two concepts that are bandied about a lot. One would be maslaha, the other would be darura. Maslaha means benefit, public benefit. It's not just public benefit, but general benefits. And then darura, necessity. And so you'd have rulings that would predicate on these two ethical legal constructs. Well, if there is a necessity, a darura, a life threat or necessity, then the patient can do so and so, right? And just like that. And if the doctor assesses that there's a life threat or necessity, then they're permitted to do so and so. Or if society and the doctor and the patient think there's benefit in this procedure, and the benefits outweigh the harms, and the benefit can go forth. But those concepts are very different. And when I think of benefit as a physician, maybe I'm thinking about it in terms of statistics and population epidemiology around whether this treatment, this vaccine is beneficial. I might need to treat 100 or 200 people to say with the vaccine to have one individual be benefited from that vaccine. That's the way I might think about it, right? But the way that the jurist thinks about it might be: is there any element of sin? Can I find any legal decree from my predecessors? Can I find any sources in the Quran and the Sunnah that might say this action is going to be ultimately punished by God? So benefit for them means very different things to them than to me, right? Human benefit actually extends to all the worldly benefit for them and doesn't necessarily for the physician. So what we try to do is actually clarify the terms, right? Because you have dialogue without a lexicon that's shared. And therefore you can't dialogue. I think that's the first step, right? On these big terms: benefit, harm, risk, medicine, right? The ethical legal, the imagination of scholars oftentimes is that medicine is cure, right? You go to a doctor, you have an issue, one-stop shop, he fixes you. But the practice of medicine in our modern age is one where we manage chronic disease. That is not something that is really fathomable to many jurists at this point, right? that the fact that you have to take blood pressure medicine every day for 10 years to prevent a mild heart attack. That's what I do, right? Then that's very different than a surgeon cutting up someone, removing out a tumor. So I think we need to get sophisticated with our language and lexicon, but you have to have this shared discussion of vocabulary. So I can, the physicians and the other stakeholders, right, can understand what the law is talking about when they talk about benefit, and what the, what the health policy thinks about benefit, and what are the tools for adjudicating that benefit. Because it's all about, in the end, right, removing harm, bringing out benefit in some sort of way. So we must think about that. So that's my big answer to you, that there's other fields, but here we can at least concretize some terms, so we know what we're talking about. And then there might be then space to have a conversation about what is the best and what is the good and what's right and what's wrong. Even those terms are problematic. But in any case, we need to first get around those terms.
We have a question here.
Actually, it's a three-part question.
After part 2, I sleep.
I might forget the third part by the time I get there. The first one is what we were talking about at the beginning of your lecture. What's so Islamic about Islamic bioethics? How is that different from, is there Jewish bioethics, Christian bioethics, so on and so forth? Secondly, the very first model you presented where a physician goes to a jurist or a few jurists, do they typically go to a physician to seek technical advice and vice versa? And the third question related to that is there a body, or is there any progress towards a body that brings all these stakeholders together, physicians, jurists, to come up with different definitions, different solutions based on different schools of thought?
Oh.
Thank you.
So, one, yes. So you'll find, so as I mentioned to you, that if we think about Islamic bioethics, or the primary material for Islamic bioethics is our fatwa, I think that's problematic. I mentioned that to you, right? For many reasons, but one of them is this is a single conversation, right, between one person and two people, basically, oftentimes. However, you will note in those fatwas that at the end, many times with jurist rights, they say, ask a trustworthy, upright Muslim physician, and if he consents to this idea, then you're okay. So they cycle back and tell the individuals asking the question whether or not I can do something or I can't do something, that the person who you need to ask will tell you the bounds of what the legal tradition says, but if this applies, like life threat, if this applies to you, you must go then ask the physician, right? Or for example, in brain death, it was, the brain death, you had this big, and so this will answer your second question. So when there are big issues, right, there are bodies like the Islamic Organization for Medical Sciences I put up here earlier, and the Islamic Fiqh Academies, and others that come together, and they bring together jurists and physicians, and they say, okay, we want to have a consensus opinion perspective on brain death or stem cell transfer or whatever it might be. And then they do what they do is, and this is so this was prominently in the 80s and 90s, maybe early 2000s, they've sort of petered out a little bit, but they would look at physicians, and they would get physicians to look at their own literature. So such and such technique, what's the benefit, harm of that technique? What are the leading authorities in your own field talk about it? So we want you to tell us the current state of knowledge in your field. Then we'll talk about our juridical opinion. And yes, there will be many different jurists with different stripes. Shafi, Hamadi, whatever you want. They say, okay, that we look at it this way. And they would come together with a perspective. So, but in the end, sometimes that imagination was still left upon the physician. So for example, in brain death, all the physicians, and so the IFA, OIC IFA, and also the Islamic Academy, the Organization of Islamic Conferences, and the IOMS that I mentioned, you had physicians say that brain death is death. They had their own opinion, brain death is death, brain death is death, and they would ask the jurist asked them, what do you mean by brain death? What is your understanding of brain death, right? Some would say, and someone's head's cut off, is that what brain death is something else? And they actually, even though all the physicians said that brain death is death, they said, well, we think of it, some of them said, we think of it as a dying state, not death, for various reasons, theologically and legally. So here you have another discursive point, right? They would say, what is your knowledge of your body saying is death? But we still have some discretion here. So there are these sorts of, and I think that genre, within Islamic bioethics, those fiqh council rulings, where these bodies came together, I think are is the data to mine, not individual fatwas, but those, because they had great discussions, some dated now, but they had all different types of scholars together. They had people present data, and they came up with divergent opinions, and they would kind of like the Supreme Court, assenting and dissenting views. Okay, so but we don't have that. So in the United States, for example, we don't have an Islamic Bioethical Advisory Board. There's no one who's Muslim that I know has ever been on the Presidential Council for President Commission for Bioethics. While we do have prominent organizations that have Christian bioethics, there's a Society of Christian Bioethics, right? There's a Journal of Christian Bioethics. There, right? Similarly for Judaism, there's an Encyclopedia of Jewish Medical Ethics. So we don't have that in our community, and I think that's another challenge for us. That one is getting the material together, people together to produce that. Second, we have nothing to say. Is our tradition really silent on these issues? Like we have nothing to offer society. That's both of those answers are no. We do, but we just don't get there.
I have a question for you. In today's society of medicine, a lot of it's driven by decisions that are made in the realm of financial. In other words, a lot of times it's not necessarily the patient's best interest, but the interest of the corporations or the interest of the people that's running the pharmaceutical companies that have control over the doctors and things like that. And it causes, and really, I don't see very much ethical decision making in a lot of these doctors when it comes to that, because what happens is that they're prescribing medications and things that are not necessarily good for the patient based on whatever holdings they have. I'm only mentioning that to say that that's in the Western point of view in terms of their ethics, which is bankrupt. What is the difference in your approach or your body's approach when it comes to the issues of the financial considerations posed to the ethical?
I think you raise a good point that there are a lot of vested interests in any space, any field, right? So and it's not particularly just medicine, but any field, business, right? Education, right? Why are certain textbooks produced and others not? Why are certain schools low performing, taken over by charter schools or profit making at times and others not? Or even if they're non-profit, there's a different motive, right? So I think that's just the space we reside in modernity, that there are a lot of vested interests in any area of human activity. Medicine is similar. I think that the caricature that you paint is one that's often painted, that doctors inherent, and I think it's overplayed, right? That doctors are prescribing, I think, right, that they're prescribing things that they know are problematic because they have a financial vested interest. I mean, I'm an emergency medicine doctor. I'll tell you that my bottom line is not affected at all by what I do or don't do. Oftentimes I tell the patients, I don't want to do this test on you, but they're insistent that I have to figure out any single anomaly that exists. So it's opposite, right? I'm chained to the patient. I don't want them to be upset, right? Or I don't want them to sort of feel like there's always an answer, but they think science always has an answer. So we should do some bigger, better tests, right? So I think that there are many different forces. I'm just saying that there are many different forces. And indeed, there is this question about pharmaceutical influence, right? With the little pens that we get, does this change prescribing pattern? We know that it does. We've done research on that, right? That's why you need research. We've done research. Hence, many schools don't allow pharmaceutical companies to come in and give lunches, sponsor lunches, even give pens, because that is shown to recall, that drug, that new antibiotic. That recall happens, even if you don't think of it, but it happens. So I think that my point is that we're also, from the House of Medicine, cognizant of these sort of factors as far as the financial incentives, right? So there is this sense for some professions that is more, and other professions is less, but you can't divorce it from the way that we practice medicine. Here in the United States, we don't think of physicians as state actors. When I was in the UK, physicians think of themselves as state actors, public health professionals to benefit society. That's not how America is. That's not how physicians think about it. We have rights to practice medicine the way I want to practice it unless X, Y, Z, right? So this autonomy-driven society, both in patients and physicians. So that's a long-winded answer, but I think that how do we think about it? Well, I'll tell you that I have not come across many writings around influence of pharmaceutical company and financial factors in medicine from the Islamic Bioethics perspective. I haven't come across it in the English language because I don't think we're thinking about it. And I don't think we have a well-developed critique of modern medicine from an Islamic vantage point, which is why another reason why Islamic studies must think about medicine, but we don't think about it critically because we don't have people thinking about it critically. That the fact, for example, I'll give you a clear example. Everybody talks about prevention, right? Health should be about prevention. Islamic medicine is about prevention. But when you think about how that plays a role in the education of medical professionals, we are taught to find disease, right? We dissect the body to find disease. What's the anomaly? We get machines to look at the anomaly. We're not thinking about prevention. We're thinking about finding disease. That's a different mindset. But we have no well-developed critique from the Islamic vantage point of this. Others do. And my only point is there's a paucity. So hopefully we'll get there, but we need to have informed individuals thinking deeply in centers and institutions. I don't have a body. I mean, it's me and a few mentees and whatever else it is. There's no big body that I have to do that, but I want to point this out for us to develop.
Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Aasim Padela, for that informative talk.